All right, good morning or good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Talking HealthTech podcast. Nathan Moore here, one of your community ambassadors, and I'm here talking today with Peter Catt from Virtual Blue Limited. Peter, thanks for joining us.
You're very welcome. It's good to be here, Nathan. Thank you.
No worries. So look, could you just make at Talking HealthTech podcast, we love to know a bit of behind the people who are behind the companies we're talking to. So would you mind just introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about you before we dive into the company?
Yeah, sure. So I'm the director of Quantum and AI, and we'll talk a little bit about quantum at some point, I'm sure, for Virtual Blue. So we've been around for about 7 years now. We also had two other companies, so the Space-Time, which was natural language processing with IBM, and a company called Replica that did concierge-style avatars, website concierge. And we pulled the three companies together late last year because we found that we had some common customers and we were doing the same thing and billing the same people from different companies. And also reduced our workload, frankly, going from three companies to one. So Virtual Blue, the background to Virtual Blue is they were born out of robotic process automation. So I'm talking software robots here, automating back-end processes. They've done a lot in healthcare. They're about 80% customer base is healthcare. A lot of work around referrals, claims processing, and generally the back-end processes. Whereas Space-Time and Replica are very front-end, patient or customer-facing experiences and journeys. So to have the three of them together, perfect synergy, and that's where the businesses came from. My background is prior to getting into this natural language space with IBM about 7 years ago. We're now Microsoft partners, by the way. We've moved away from IBM for various reasons. I had about 10 years with SAP in the analytics and data science space for the team here, and that was sold to Accenture, that business. And prior to that, various supply chain and type of operational jobs as opposed to, and across various industries. With the exception of pharmaceuticals, nothing in healthcare up until the last 7 years.
Oh, I'm sure it's been a fun journey for you, learning the eccentricities that we sometimes bring from a healthcare perspective.
Yeah. Every industry, absolutely. But there's certainly a type of natural and understandable conservatism in healthcare.
Absolutely. And thanks for that background. And I mean, that as you were describing those businesses, that Venn diagram, I can see the overlaps. And as you say, there's natural synergies. It's really great. And look, I'm gonna pretend for a minute I'm not slightly disappointed we're not talking about physical robots here. When I read the brief sheet, I was a little excited, but I'll contain my disappointment and we'll work with it as best we can. All right.
Sure. What I would say is everyone names their robots, right? So there is some type of personification of robots, even though they're sitting on a workstation somewhere.
Absolutely. So look, just diving into it a little bit. So let's just talk about how we, working with patient engagement and efficiency. So let's talk a bit about Smart Engage and how does it revolutionize patient engagement and, improve booking rates? What are the practical benefits clinics can expect from using your solutions here?
It sounds like you're reading from that info sheet pretty well. Thanks.
I may or may not have.
Yeah.
Where we start on script and then we see where we end up.
So Smart Engage is primarily radiology bookings. So, because it's bringing natural language processing to the table, it can deal with a complex process, a complex workflow, as opposed to something which is rules-based, which is probably a bit too locked down. So what it does is it presents with an avatar, and it's just a case of clicking on it on the landing website of the business, the radiology clinic or company. And then it comes up and it guides people through. It can do FAQ related to the booking of the procedure or pricing, for instance. But it's generally there to complete a booking, radiology booking. And it has real-time integration with the radiology information system, the RIS. And we've integrated with 3 different RIS providers to date. We have about 60 live clinics, but that's growing fairly quickly. And, the value proposition is twofold. One for the business is it's contact center deflection. So you're taking volume away from the contact center, particularly, Monday mornings when you've got long wait times for customers. But it's also 24/7 self-service for the patient, for the customer, and that's pretty important. So it's a type of dual value proposition there. In terms of the economics, you're going from dollars to cents and, contact center versus online self-service. The mechanics of it are pretty straightforward. It's reading real-time availability from the RIS. Once we've captured all the customer details, the referral form, anything that we're passing through to the RIS, that's deleted. We keep some analytics information, and that's useful, but there's no PHI that we retain. So in terms of security, it's Microsoft hosted, so it's sitting in Sydney in most cases for the Australian customers. And we're just passing that through and deleting once we get confirmation from the RIS that it's received what it needs to make that booking concrete. So the real-time aspect of it is pretty important. And there are two ways we can do that. We usually use an API, and most RIS are equipped with API. Not all versions, but that's definitely a factor. Or we use a robotic process automation. And for a robot, it's got a username, it's got a password, and it logs in like we do. And then it's interacting with the RIS, and that's another method of integrating.
Oh, really interesting. One part I'd like to jump onto a little bit, you mentioned earlier in that response, was that idea of using actual, personified intelligent avatars, and even, I guess, in that robotic side. So, I mean, that is, I know there's different people playing in similar functionalities and things like that, but this idea of actually having an intelligent avatar there, actually a personification, a visualization. Like, can you talk me through a bit why you drove that? It's something I'm passionate about and we've used ourselves in our business, but I'd love to hear the reason you've gone down that path.
It's interesting. And, everyone that we've got in front of, we've said, look, we can take you through a guided process with natural language processing, with or without an avatar, right? The avatar is absolutely optional. And it's even optional for the user. They can toggle it off on the screen if they don't want this avatar. We've got the metrics around that. No one toggles it off. They go through and sure, it has some novelty value today. But I think there's more to it than that. I think, we're hardwired to be engaged by people's faces. I mean, that's what we are. We're social animals, and that's part of it. So even though it does have novelty value, there's some research out of Texas, of all places, and what it showed is if you're using an avatar for this type of guided process, it was bookings, but not necessarily medical bookings, you get about 150% improvement in completion rates. So, you can only be presented with, and there are some good systems out there, don't get me wrong, that are text-based or they've got other visuals. You can either be presented with pages of online form, and you'll find that the dropout rates can be fairly high. And it's not surprising. You think, oh, really? And then you get onto the contact center, and then you've got delays getting in, so you can't really win. But the idea of the avatar is to engage and also assist in terms of where people are in the workflow and what's happening in the workflow, what they need to provide. So it has an educational element to it, running through that booking process, particularly if it's asking screening questions and it's getting quite involved. And then, of course, you've got choice of clinics and date, time, etc. But it really is about engagement, and people are engaged by it. There's no doubt. The research says that. Our analytics say that. So it is worth doing, but it's optional. And the other component is, does it align with your brand? And of course, we'll do a custom avatar, custom voice, and get brand alignment with the look and feel and what you're trying to achieve, if that's the path you want to go down.
Yeah, fascinating. Really, really interesting insights. Thank you for that. Next part I wanted to jump on to was that you've mentioned in the briefing notes, this neural insights and clinical operations, NICO, as it combines deep learning and quantum technology. So before we jump into, what it does, just for some of our listeners, these might be words they've heard kind of chucked around a bit, but could you just do a little bit of a, overview? What do you mean with deep learning and quantum technologies?
Okay. Well, I'll start with deep learning. Deep learning is, a lot of people will be familiar with the concept of a neural network. It type of mimics what we do. It's actually, that's a bit of a leap, but it has layers. So you'll have an input, and that may be an image or it may be speech, and there could be various inputs, obviously text. And then it runs through layers of neurons, if you like, similar to the brain conceptually. That's what I'm saying. In actual fact, it's quite different. And then it has an output. It derives an output. Now, deep learning is type of an arbitrary term based on how many layers there are. It's about the complexity, the relative complexity of that neural network. And that's all deep learning means, that it's quite a complex model as opposed to a fairly superficial neural network. So what we can do in terms of patient forecasting is we can take in a lot of factors, including not just the historic time series, but that's really useful, as you can imagine, in terms of days of the week and hours of the day and peak times. But we can also, overlay socioeconomic factors, economic factors, particularly for long-term capital requirements planning for imaging equipment. And, certainly you can model, given that unfortunately the world's experienced COVID, you can model those type of outbreaks and the effect that they will have on, quelling customer demand. So, these are powerful models. That said, statistical time series models are pretty powerful as well. And if you combine the two, which we do, you get a very good hybrid result in terms of accuracy of anticipating customer demand. Now, of course, the pushback from some players is, well, we're capacity constrained, so why would you bother? Well, if you're capacity constrained to understand what the true demand is and what capacity you could be meeting, particularly at a future point in time, it's still pretty valuable strategically, even if you're not doing it tactically. That said, I think the more insight you get, the better you can manage an operation, even if you are resource constrained. And of course, we're type in one way or another, we're all resource constrained.
First, Nathan, deviation off script here. Then you mentioned about the more information you've got, strategically versus tactically, and we sort of get that. One of the challenges I've seen, I lived it, where we were getting bombarded with bits of data from different sources and things. That data can be really valuable as long as it's presented and visualized in a meaningful, insightful way. So, I mean, how do you tackle that?
It's a really good point. So, NICO, which is Neural Insights for Clinic Operations, it can run as background jobs. It's all cloud-based, it's software as a service, without having any interaction at all. And the form that takes is that we will, at regular intervals, whether it's hourly, whether it's daily, we'll upload the actual booking information or appointment information from your clinic systems, whether it's, PMS or RIS, and then that will rerun the patient forecast, and that's when it goes into a quantum optimizer. So what we're taking for the quantum optimizer, and this is the second part of the question, which I haven't answered yet, is there'll be patient demand, there'll be imaging equipment or capacity, whatever form your operations take, or capacity information. There'll be people's availability, clinician availability, and other team members there, as well as their preferences, which is pretty important. So the optimizer is considering preferences. Do people like working X shift, Y shift, days of week, childcare accommodation, that type of issue. And once it's got that, it does an optimization, and it's using quantum to do that optimization. You think, okay, so what does that really mean? What it means is you can have a very complex operation with thousands of staff and preferences, which really blows out to quite a complex problem when you're overlaying patient demand as well. And in near real time, you can reschedule. Now, what rescheduling means for us is that gets pushed out to Microsoft for shifts. So it's just on your mobile device and you're having a look at it and going, okay, all right, those are my shifts for the coming week or whatever horizon we lock down, which is done in agreement with the business. So really all you're seeing as a business or as a user, a clinician, is an update on your schedule. And that's through Microsoft technology. So, there's no real need for someone to go in and look at forecasting charts, which we have, and they're quite nice, by the way. But if someone was interested in going in and, altering that forecast along with, a narrative as to why, they certainly can, but it's not necessary. It can all run behind the scenes, getting the real-time information, re-optimizing as it sees fit. If you find that a whole lot of clinicians have phoned in, there's bit of a wave of COVID coming through, you can real time reschedule. And that's pretty impressive because, with a typical linear program or it could be an overnight run if you've got thousands of staff. So the ability to reschedule real time really has a value proposition to it. And that's what quantum allows, because it can hold problems in superposition and then collapse that into an optimal output, which is a whole other conversation.
Maybe that's our next podcast. Absolutely. Yeah. Deep diving with Nath, that's what we'll call it. Sorry, Pete. No, really, really, really interesting. So look, the next part I wanted to sort of tackle, and you started to touch on a bit about that, system integration and scalability. And you've mentioned the APIs and then you've got processes of talking where you need to talk. But I guess I'd love to hear on your side, what are the challenges you face in this process and how you overcome them at Virtual Blue? What are some of them, whether they just be technical or practical challenges that you see out there?
Yeah, in terms of integration, it technically it's pretty straightforward. As long as the API that you're talking to is well documented and accurately documented. We've had some documentation from various providers. I'm not going to name anyone. And really the documentation doesn't always truly reflect what the RIS is doing with its API. Now, that's okay because you work that out pretty quickly when you're doing some unit testing, that this is the actual behavior of the system you're talking to as opposed to documented behavior. And that's not unusual. We've all read instructions that don't really relate to to what you're trying to achieve. So, I mean, that's one of the issues. The other thing is, some of these players are pretty busy. And worst case scenario, if we can't get support from another vendor, then we can always use a robot and we can just integrate without using the API and really have zero dependence on them. It's just getting in there and doing what we need it to do. And the way that we do that with a robot is we'll sit down with someone and we'll record the process that they're doing, and then we'll translate that into a form that the robot can mimic, if you like. And that's what a user would do in terms of making a booking within a RIS. So that's pretty straightforward, and it's always a good plan B. API is our preference. I mean, that's pretty elegant if there's a good API that we can talk to. But ultimately, we've got choices in terms of integration. And really, it's never the technical with these projects. I mean, that's the integration side. The other side, of course, is change management. And it is about people. It's about what's in it for me. What's the value proposition? Is this going to add to my workload? Is it going to reduce it? Is it going to reduce it to the point where it's potentially a threat to my position? So, there's various angles and optics around change. But, I mean, it's a bit of a cliche, but without serious executive sponsorship, you could really end up in a distressed project. So that's obviously we do some internal work before we sign up with anyone. And that's one of the things we look at. What is the degree of executive sponsorship? Are there the sponsors, co-sponsors, are they really committed to the project, or are they ticking a box for someone else? So there's serious considerations. And in a nutshell, I would say, most projects are actually, the basis of their success is change management. It's not technical. The technical stuff is well known. If you've got good software engineering practices, you're going to cover security, you're going to cover scalability, robustness. It's just not going to be an issue. It's about change.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's really great to hear that sort of insight coming as well, because it's not this idea of throw the technology at the problem and it's fixed. So no, wonderful. On the idea, you mentioned that workflow piece. You mentioned sort of engaging with the people. I mean, anecdotally, what's some of the feedback you're seeing about workflows? How are things being affected? Were there any surprises sort of in any of your deployments out there?
No, there's, you'll certainly get people that are protecting their turf and those type of issues. I mean, I think, the biggest learning for us is we can get face-to-face with people in the kick-off meetings and actually get some rapport going, and it's not all done remotely, but we do actually meet people. I mean, that's really helpful. And then you've got someone that you can get on the phone to and say, how do we address this? There's going to be a degree of change around this. What do we need to do to get this across the line? So, I mean, that in itself is helpful. It's a people business. And that's probably, we had a bit of a downturn during COVID, as you can imagine, because we couldn't get across the Tasman and actually meet people face to face, and that's difficult. It's not like buying a Ford or a Toyota online that you'd be happy to buy sight unseen because you know what it is and if it's real. Yeah. I think there's a degree of trust with software, and trust is about fronting up to people and saying this is what we can achieve and we can't achieve this, and having some rapport.
It's really refreshing that trust idea. You talk about the trust in technology, but in healthcare, it's just amplified to the nth degree as well. Yeah. Because it's not just about trust, what it does for the patients. It's just this, I don't know, it seems to be this undercurrent, theme of needing that trust, and healthcare sales, healthcare engagements are about that. And if you don't have that, you got no chance.
Totally. And we don't do anything diagnostic or prognostic. That's not what we're about. Yeah. But it's still people's experience of the technology, whether it be internal or whether it be, customers and patients. So it's critical. Yeah. And no one wants a false start.
Just on that idea of, prognostics and I guess performance improvement, things like that. Like what does that look like for such a highly technical company? Like how do you gather feedback? How do you improve your models? How do you keep yourself future-proof?
Well, good question. We have regular, maybe too many, roadmap meetings. And from time to time, we'll invite third parties into our roadmap meetings, whether it be customers or whether it be vendors. It could be Microsoft with an architect. And say, what do you think we could do to add to this roadmap? And then we're using a Kanban process and we're reviewing this on a pretty regular basis with stand-ups. But our roadmaps are central to what we're doing, our solution roadmaps. And a lot of it comes from customer desires. And then we'll sit back and we'll say, okay, is this a one-off or is this something that we should incorporate into the product ongoing? And invariably, it's something that we'll incorporate into the product ongoing. And there's no additional cost to the customer that suggested it because we think it makes sense on the roadmap. And there's nothing like customer feedback to really ensure that you've got product market fit. As a technologist, it's easy to sit back and my wife would say sit in the dungeon, but that's not altogether correct. And come up with a good idea, what you think is a good idea, but in actual fact, the market's not interested in that. And that, that's the seduction of sitting back and looking at technologies and what they could possibly do. Ultimately, it needs to derive value for a customer. So if that's the signal, if we've got a customer coming to us saying, can you provide XYZ functionality? That's validating for the solution and that's great. That's fantastic.
Awesome. Well, look, it sort of leads me to my final question. I'm gonna two-prong it just because I really want to get your insights on both sides. The first one, the cliched, what's next for Virtual Blue? Like, what do the next few years look like? And then we'll have the fun one after that, all right?
Okay, all right. So for us, we're very much focused on ANZ. We're doing more work around Gen AI, large language models, but really locking them down to serious use cases. And we've got some mechanisms to reduce what's called hallucinations and improve the accuracy of that. So looking at your own knowledge base and really relying on that. So the large language model stuff, it's fantastic. There's a few issues there. I think they'll be ironed out over the next year or two. But we're taking quite a bit of that to market now, including just the fairly mundane stuff like extracting information from forms, but using large language models. We typically also use a secondary rules engine just to validate that to get the accuracy up. So that type of use case is important to us. But we are focused on ANZ. We don't have world domination aspirations. We've looked at the US. That comes with some pretty big hurdles. It's also a much more litigious environment, right or wrong. So, we're comfortable with the idea of being able to get in front of people within a couple of hours and, have a decent conversation. So, we're very much ANZ focused and I don't see that changing. I don't see as I say, about 80% of our customers are healthcare. That's more likely to grow than anything else, that percentage.
All right. And now for the other part. So for you, Peter, what does the future of, AI technology in healthcare, what are you predicting in the coming, 3 to 5 years? What's the exciting thing coming in the future for you?
Well, given that I was in the natural language processing space with IBM and I didn't see ChatGPT coming, maybe I'm not. But that's really changed things up.
Yeah.
3 years ago, I had, people would say, "What do you do?" And I'd say AI, and I don't know anything about that. Well, natural language processing, working with computers to understand what people are saying and then give responses that people can understand as opposed to using code, right? Now everyone's an expert on natural language processing. They might not call it that. It might be ChatGPT, but that's a good thing. It's a conversation starter. It's people getting familiar with the technology. I think these models will mature quickly. So much investment has gone into them. I don't believe it's a bubble. I think it will pan out and there is value to be had. There's uncertainty now. I've never seen the tech landscape changing so quickly, so that in itself is interesting. They're difficult at times to keep up.
Absolutely.
It's opportunity. So I'm certainly, I'm positive about it. I think, just digressing a little bit, I think quantum will make serious gains into material science, biology, pharmaceuticals, and that type of, these very large optimization problems. It will excel at, and it will be a game changer. There is something called quantum machine learning as well, where you apply quantum computing to machine learning problems. I think, society will get some really good outcomes from that as well. There's a whole other conversation around ethics and bias, but I think there's a lot of upside for society.
It's just on that quantum piece. Is that related to the vast number of considerations that it's able to?
It is. It's like protein folding. It's the ability to actually model and simulate these scenarios, environments, and that's going to be a big leap forward. Now, the technology is not quite mature, but it's worth keeping an eye on. It actually does optimization problems really well in terms of logistics, including staffing, and has done for about 12 years now. It's a Canadian company that kicked that off. But for these broader use cases, it's still evolving. But, you never know when there's going to be a big breakthrough. Hopefully better than fusion, which we've been talking about for a long time.
All right, well, look, thank you so much, Peter. I've learned a lot, and I have no doubt our listeners have as well. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Nathan. Thanks very much. Take care.
See ya. Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Talking Health Tech. Make sure you like and subscribe and share this episode with someone who might find it valuable. For more information and resources about healthcare innovation, visit talkinghealthtech.com.